This is the first time in this channel that I actually review a DAC amp, especially a portable one, because I usually don't use a lot of portable stuff. I usually just run things of just a DAP like this, like the HIBY R6 Pro, which is in itself a very powerful and a very good sounding DAC. DAP. So yeah, I usually don't find myself needing a portable DAC amp, and I usually find a hassle to need to stack a DAC amp on top of either my phone or my digital audio player. So yeah, I usually don't use a lot of DAC, so that's probably a disclaimer, I guess, for this review. So in today's video, I'll be comparing the Dethonray Honey, the H1s, or the IFI iDSD signature. So to make it easy, I'm just going to call it the H1 versus the signature. The IFI iDSD signature is personally owned, and the H1 is sent to me by a friend of mine. Thank you so much for sending this to me. And the reason that I bought the IFI signature is, to be completely honest, it's just for the shits and giggles, I guess, because it's a different experience using a very good sounding portable DAC amp from just using a phone. So yeah, and I did quite a bit of comparison with the H1s with a lot of headphones and IMs, and the sad thing with this comparison is I can't compare the HE6 from the in this comparison. I can't use the HE6 as a comparison, because even though the HE6 is very transparent, the Dethonray just simply can't power them properly. And that, I guess, the first comparison is the Dethonray is much weaker in its output power. In the Ultraman firmware, which is the most powerful firmware that you can implement on the H1, is it can output only about 1 watt. So no, not a lot of power there. And with the IFI iDSD signature, it outputs like 4 watts. So to call this a powerful portable DAC amp is quite a bit of an understatement, because this powers insanely. The difference in power is quite monumental. For example, this. I have this. I bet a lot of you have never actually seen a headphone like this. This is the Pioneer Model SE500, and this is very hard to drive headphone. How hard to drive is it? Well, when people ask me what's the hardest to drive headphone around, I guess like the conventional headphone that's hard to drive, a lot of people, or even sometimes I actually answer the HE6 or the HE6 SE, because those are quite difficult to drive. And this is a lot harder. This is in a different way, because the HE6 SE has a very low sensitivity, and this has a very high impedance. How high is it? Well, is it 300 ohms? No, it's not 600 ohms. It's not 800 ohms. It's 1,000 ohm headphone. It's a 1,000 ohm piezoelectrostatic headphone from 1975, which is a long time ago. The time where bass on headphones don't exist. And yeah, a very, very old and difficult to drive headphones. And in most tracks, the IFI iDSD signature can power them quite well, I guess. It can easily power the HE6. It can power this thing for most tracks. The only tracks that the IFI is not sufficient for the SE500 is a lot of the more quiet, chesky tracks. So for most tracks, you'll be okay with it, and that's actually a very, very impressive thing coming out from the signature. So yeah, the Dethonray can easily power things like the HD800s or the HD600s, the what do you call it, the Zame Aeolus, but it can't power a more lower sensitivity planars, for example the HIBY Arias. I tried powering the Arias with these, and I for a lot of tracks, for more quieter definitely tracks, I ended up just maxing out the volume on the each one, and still can't get the loudness that I usually prefer. Now keep in mind, I usually listen to a moderately loud volume, so that might be just a me problem rather than the Honey problem. However, the IFI iDSD signature, even in normal power mode, is quite powerful, I guess. So with this review, to make it a bit more fair, I guess, for the most of the time, I'll be putting the power mode of the signature to eco mode, which is the lowest power. So it's not going to be because of the headroom type of comparison. So yeah, I guess that's it for power, for fit and finish and accessories. So for accessories, the IFI definitely have more accessories, but is that better considering the Dethonray actually gives you an OTG cable, Type-C OTG cable, which is basically arguably all you need for a portable setup. The IFI sadly don't provide you with something like this that you need to buy separately, which is like the small on-the-go cable. Yeah, and you basically got a longer blue IFI cable, the usual IFI cable. You can just look it up and look at a picture. It tells. I'm not going to waste your time just explaining the contents of the box of the IFI, because it's so... a lot of things that I probably would not use like at all. So yeah. The features, IFI definitely have a lot of things going on for it. It has the X base, the 3D plus, the different power settings. You have the different filters, which I find that Bit Perfect sounds the best for me. I don't know if it's actually placebo or I find it a bit cleaner, so I'm going to put it on a Bit Perfect here. And it has also an iMatch for the super high sensitivity IMs. So this pairs well with everything basically. And the Dethonray on the normal firmware pairs very well with IMs. However, if you're going to run headphones on them, you basically need to change them, especially lower sensitivity headphones or higher impedance headphones. You definitely want to change this into the Ultraman firmware, which is easy enough, but you actually need to plug into a laptop for it. So it's a few extra steps than just changing the switches from the IFI. So I think for features and overall accessories, I think the IFI is a clear winner here. However, for build and finish and just the overall shape and design, I find that the Dethonray actually is built quite a bit better. If you can see, the IFI is a bit bigger. I guess it has a larger footprint. However, the Dethonrays and the IFIs actually this weighs very similarly, and the finish of the Dethonray is actually a bit smoother and more premium feeling, while the IFI is kind of a bit rough and jagged on the edges. So for fit and finish, I think the Dethonray is a winner, I guess. And yeah, for looks, basically it kind of depends on what you like. Now let's get to the things that's most interesting, which is the sound. So in this comparison, I'll be comparing the two with different headphones and IMs. As you can see right here, I have the Sony MDR-X1000, a very highly resolving single dynamic driver IM, which is very actually revealing of the source. It's kind of like the HG800 of IMs. This is the 7Hz timeless. The thing why it's here, it's quite transparent too, and the main reason of why it's here because I don't have a lot of high sensitivity and easy to drive planar headphones. So I have 3 planar headphones right now. I have the HE6, which is impossible to run on the H1. I have the Aria, which is quite troublesome to run on the H1s. And I have the LCD-X, and the problem with the LCD-X is I actually compared the two with the LCD-X on the track. I think it's from the Amity Affliction. The album is called "Everyone Loves You Once You Leave Them," and the track is "All I Do Is Sink." And that the LCD-X still have quite a bit of body to the male vocals on the IFIs and the Dethonrays, and the character of the LCD-X still shines at both of the DAC amps, but the difference is very minimal because the LCD-X is quite an easy to drive headphone that is not very transparent to the source. So it's the type of high-end headphones that can run off basically anything, and you can achieve good sound even from like playing them off your phone or something like that. So it's difficult to judge the DACs if I'm just going to use the LCD-X. Okay, so for bass, for more, I'm not going to say for bass, but in general, a lot of testing have been done with a lot of different genres, a lot of different tracks, a lot of different recording styles. I even tried something like lo-fi's and something very hi-fi like Chesky, and with, for example, I run the Chesky's Cherokee. I think the song's name Cherokee by Camille Furman. It's one of the Chesky recordings. I tested them with the HD800s and the 7Hz timeless, and in both instances I find that the Dethonray honey is a bit more meatier, it's a bit more weight. There is a bit more weight to the sound. The timbre is also slightly better, a bit more natural in its presentation. However, what it lacks is stage width, definitely, comparing them with the IFI DC signature. I would not necessarily call the Dethonray is absolutely a warm sounding DAC, but I would say that this is a somewhat of a warmish neutral sounding DAC. It's very detailed, however. For example, when I've listened to the shreds of light from the album Tokyo Ghoul I guess it's season 3 of Tokyo Ghoul, you have the movement 1 shreds of light. It's somewhat of an orchestral deep string sound, like very good sounding track. I listened it to the with the Sony MDR-X1000, and it sounds thick, weighty, and it sounds deep, and it sounds grand on the Dethonray. On the IFI, it's not as weighty, however, it's a bit more open, it's a bit more wider with better instrument separation, and it's a bit more neutral, I guess, neutral in its all presentation. Well, where the Dethonray is slightly a bit, you know, smoother sounding, and the IFI is a bit crispier, but it's not overly crispy like, for example, the Diablo or the NX4, the topping NX4 DSD, which I also have, but is currently being borrowed by a friend of mine. And the Dethonray is not going to be somewhat of a bassier. It doesn't have the bassier presentation of something like the HIBY R6 Pro, but it somewhat sounds like a tube amp for some fucking reason, and it's different. It's different from anything that I've listened to on a portable DAC amp. It sounds analog, however, it still has a lot of detail in it. But it's not the most technical, especially in terms of soundstage image separation and layering. I think the IFI signature is a bit better on that one, and also in terms of its transients and an initial leading impact of the notes, the initial strike of the notes. I think the signature is a bit quicker, it's a bit more precise, it's a bit sharper in its delivery. However, the Dethonray is not blunt at all, but it's just slightly a bit rounded in its initial hit. However, for the bass note, I actually find the Dethonray to have a bit more energy behind the hits. It's not going to be as precise nor as articulate as the IFI iDSD signature, but it has a bit more weight to it, I guess you can say. Although I wouldn't say it's an overly bassy DAC amp. I think the IFI with its X bass boost is a bit more bassier than that. I think it runs kind of like in the middle. When I play a lot of instrumental albums, for example, Cassiopeia. For example, Cassiopeia, I forgot the track. Let me take a look at that. I'm sorry, my DAC is kind of lagging. So I recently played albums. Not recently played albums, actually. for a lot of the Cassiopeia tracks, when you have a lot of instruments playing there, I find that the Dethonray's cymbal strike is not as clear nor as forward, I guess. It's not as forward sounding as the IFI DSD signature. I find the iDSD signature could resolve the cymbals a bit better than the Dethonray. However, for more focused tracks, for example, like the aforementioned Cherokee, when I listened to them at the with the HD800, which in itself is a bit more analytical in its presentation, I find that the Dethonray actually gives it a bit more body to the vocal. It's a bit thicker. It's not overly warm or muffled sounding. However, it's just a bit weightier. It's a bit more full sounding, I guess. And with the IFI, you when you hear the HD100, you basically hear the HD800s playing. So it doesn't change the sound that much, I guess, with the IFI. And it also happens, also the results are also consistent with almost every single, not almost, but with every single headphones and IEMs that I've tried. Maybe not LCDX, the LCDX, you do still notice a difference on the LCDX, however, not as much as the HG800s, nor the EX1000 or the Timeless. So that with the consistent notable differences of these, I can finally conclude that the Dethonray is somewhat of a more tubey presentation. It's the initial edge is not as fast nor as clean as the IFI signature. However, it has a bit more weight in its delivery. It's not blunted. It's not lacking in terms of dynamics, but I think it has quite a decent amount of dynamics there. It's not going to be as wide as I would prefer them to be. It's actually quite a more narrow and more intimate presentation. It's somewhat like listening to an HD 600. It's more intimate. It's a bit more lush. Yeah, so it's basically like the HD 600 of DAC amps. Basically, it's very powerful vocal, sounds thick and lush and full bodied, and it's also equally detailed too. It's also very detailed too, I guess. Not lacking. It's not fuzzy. It's not hazy. It has a very clean background. It's a very premium sounding amp, DAC amp. And I would say that a lot of things would sound actually better on the Honey, especially if you own a lot of more brighter IEMs or headphones like I do. This thing is actually quite enjoyable, but sadly it lacks power. Definitely, that's the number one factor of me purchasing the signature over the Honey. It lacks power, and the signature is a bit more natural sounding. So if you have a more warmer headphones, for example, the Aeolus or the HD 600, I guess, I would say that the IFI would present them in a bit more neutral light, I guess. It doesn't have the best. This doesn't have the thick, warm, and good natural timbre of the Dethonray Honey. It has a slight glare to it. It's not as bad as the the Diablo nor the NX4 DSD, but it sounds just what I would consider neutral, like that. It's not as natural as the Dethonray, but it's still neutral enough, I guess. The soundstage Transients is a bit faster here too. It's wider. It's slightly deeper actually. It's also has better instrument separation, layering, and imaging. Actually, it helps the imaging. It's not going to be as wide as for example, the Dethonray Aries and the Jotunheim 2 stack I have in front of me, but it's it's decently wide. Devon, it's somewhat of a topping stack wide. Yes, you can say that. But however, it has a very good speed and dynamics, has very good features. If you're lacking in bass, you can just add the bass here. Yeah, and it's in eco mode too, which is, it can be much more powerful with them. And I can basically run anything off the IFI signature, which I can't do it on the Dethonray. So yeah, I guess that's it. To be completely honest, I think which one is superior? Personally, I would say the IFI is superior in terms of the overall device, and yeah, overall device is superior. It's has a bit more features, a bit more accessories, and it sounds more neutral, I guess. So it pairs with a lot more headphones or NIMs than something that's a bit neutral to warm, like the Dethonray Honey. But I can easily see why a lot of people would more would gravitate towards the Dethonray Honey, because it's a bit lusher, it's a bit more warmer sounding, especially if you run mostly IMs. I think that the Dethonray Honey is a viable pick. That if you run a lot of headphones like I do, no. Sadly, even though I like how the Dethonray sound, I can't realistically use the Dethonray Honey for a lot of my high-end headphones. And I can do exactly that with the IFI. So I guess that's it for today's comparison. See you next time. Godspeed.